Please do not turn off your radio, but turn up the volume on your receiver as high as it can go.
Hey there, welcome to Social Disruption, the show that shatters comfort zones, flips that script, and delivers unfiltered truth. I'm your host, Farah, and joining me is my wonderful co-host.
I'm Cheyenne, and together we're here to disrupt the airways with real conversations, no filters, no apologies.
Trigger warning, this is a show where a spine isn't optional and the truth cuts deep. Let's get into it. We're joined by a man who has seen war from the inside and now tells the story most are too afraid to touch. Pete Turner is a former military force turned master interviewer with over 70 months in combat zones and over 1,000 patrols under his belt. As the executive producer and host of The Break It Down Show, Pete brings you real voices from Nobel Prize winners to shadowed operatives. He's lived espionage, counterintelligence, and heartbreak. And now he's sharing it all. From Ukraine to PTSD to podcasting and everything in between. This episode is raw, real, and very necessary. Buckle up and let's welcome Pete to the show. Pete, thank you so much for joining us.
I can't believe we did it. It was so challenging to get in here, but I love it. It's so fun. Thank you for having me on your show. Apologies for being late. We did our best.
No worries. Like I told Pete, all of our listeners here in the private chat, they all love the 80s music anyway, so we're good to go.
So do I. I wish I had the 80s music when I was frantically trying to get in. But a little new order would have made my soul happier.
No worries. So we always start out with an icebreaker question, Pete, and we ask every guest this. 3 people, dead or alive, that you would want to have dinner with. Who would it be and why?
I would like to meet up with Hitler. And then the reason why is you always got to take a try at like fixing that history ahead of time. I feel like there's a chance. And I'd want to meet that dude just to get my head wrapped around who he is and why he is. And sometimes listening to something just helps you understand that. And that just seems so impossible and so horrible. It shocks me that we ended up in the place that we ended up in. Not we, because I wasn't there, you weren't there, but you know what I'm saying? It's appalling. And so how do you do your part and just try to understand it? Let's see, I'm going to pick dead people because I can meet all the people that are alive. I would love to talk to Mozart. I think that he'd be fascinating. He's one of the musical geniuses of all time. And what's not to talk to you about that? And just to get to know him a little bit and understand what makes him tick and how he sees the world. I've met a lot of musical geniuses on my show, and it's incredible how they perceive the world. And I would love to do that with him. Menander was this Greek guy. He wrote all of the sitcoms, but he wrote them 2,000 years ago. But a lot of his work is lost. And I would just bring a recorder and I would go and I would just shut up and let him tell me about storytelling.
I love it. And our listeners love these questions because it's always cool to know who other people would want to meet, what you would ask them if you had that chance. On this show that we do, Pete, we combine a culture war topic with interviewing a new guest to get other opinions, thoughts, insight. Let's get started with your first question. What kind of kid were you growing up? Were you curious, rebellious, a quiet observer?
I had a healthy dose of rebellion in me. My hometown had a refinery in it. And I think that shaped part of my youth where the dads were Vietnam dads. And so they weren't all that worried about us, like being involved in our day-to-day life. They had other things to do. A lot of them worked at the refinery, went out and did other things. And so we were largely left to our own devices. Now, look, we had all kinds of moms looking after us and everything. I could say to my mom, I'm going to ride my bike downtown. And that was a destination downtown. And so you'd ride your bike and we'd be gone all day. Maybe we're playing baseball or whatever it is that we were doing. And so I would say I was very adventurous. I was for sure curious. I wouldn't say I wasn't bookish, but I also was an athlete. And so I was a blend of a lot of things. I always, and this kind of goes into my career later on, but I was always able to join other groups, belong there. So whether I was hanging out with a bunch of jocks or kids that played baseball, or I was down at the pool, hanging out with the pool kids, or I was here, I was there, I was not afraid to belong to a group of people and then do pretty well within it. And so I would say that there's some hints at who I would ultimately become. But as a kid, Yeah, I read a lot. I played some video games. I definitely played a lot of sports. That was the main thing to get my energy out. I used to run to school, not because I was a runner, but because I just needed to do something. And so I would try to beat the bus because I hated taking the bus. And I would just run just as fast as I could to school. This is like in middle school. And that kind of calmed me down for a little while when I was at school. Otherwise, I was spazzy as well.
I think we all were.
Yeah.
So, what can you tell us about your family dynamics? What shaped you early on?
My dad was an abusive dude. He certainly was a good dad at times too. Got to give him credit for that. But for me, it was safer to be out of the house than in it. And my dad was unpredictable on top of being abusive. So it was just scary to be there when I was a kid. I remember, and maybe this will resonate. Again, my dad did the best with what he could, but my friends were all starting to get hamsters and I wanted to get a hamster. And so it was on me as the older brother to bone up for a younger brother and I and ask if we could have hamsters. My mom had said, ask your dad if he agrees, it's all good. And so I had to close this deal. And I was terrified to ask my dad if we could have hamsters. And I had to screw up the courage and I did it. And he said yes. And I was like, oh, good. Because I was expecting him to say no, because he always said no. He was always mad at me. And so that's the kind of household I had. And I didn't have to be around that. I didn't have to subject myself to the randomness of his moods if I was good. And so I would just be out of the house a lot.
I experienced major child abuse in my home, so I can relate somewhat to a parent being difficult. So now we're going to get into the culture war questions. Pete, what you've covered the Ukraine Russia war. What's the media not telling us?
I actually just had an episode with a guy named John Kiriakou, who's a former CIA guy, very similar to my background, but he obviously played at a different level. And we were talking about literally like the things that we don't talk about. And one of them is that Ukraine is beset by a ton of corruption. And you want to try to pick the right person, but they're all working within a corrupt system. So even if that person is not corrupt, the problem is that everything there is corrupt. So when you have a court case, you can't get a fair hearing unless you bribe the judges. And John and I talked about this in my episode. Or you get a negative finding that is illegal, not within the law, right? So you're like, I'm going to go to the European courts to get away from the Ukrainian courts. And they say, no, actually, you're right. That is your property. You get to have that back. Now you have to go back to Ukraine and say, I have this higher court finding and it disagrees with yours. And so give me my stuff back. And then Ukraine says, no, thanks. And you have to buy a judge off to get these things. If you're even able to buy a judge off, I'm not even talking about having the money. Let's say you have the money and they're like, no, you don't get to win this one. And so part of the problem with Ukraine, and I'm not anti-Ukraine, right? We have to understand that, but it's always going to be a challenge to get people to invest in that place because you don't know where your money is going and it's likely going in someone's pocket. I know of very close hand details about how they do things and how they shake each other down and how they compete. And it is not in a way that should make anybody comfortable in terms of how much money we're going to send to a place, because they're going to try to get money for things that are not towards the goal. And that's just a fact, right? So however you look at Russia, set that aside, let's understand it's very complicated to reliably get money to go from A to B being solving the problem. There's going to be things in between. That is how they do business. And so that causes people, and you don't reliably get the outcome you want. That's a real challenge. And we don't talk about that. If you talk to the wrong people, you act, oh no, you're against Russia. Or are you for Russia? No, I'm not for Russia. I'm not for anybody invading anybody else. But I am saying, if you think you know how to navigate Ukrainian politics and you don't know that there's corruption there, you've missed everything.
I would have to agree. I'm for peace. The one thing that we've been seeing a lot in the media, Pete, regarding the war, Zelensky. Let's talk about him for a second. Tell me if this is true or not. Zelensky was not elected. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's maybe not as truthful as I would say. But again, this is just me putting my opinion out there, so I'm welcome to be wrong. But I would say this: when we go abroad as a nation, the US, we do our foreign policy, we tend to snap a chalk line across the divide of people. And we say, anybody on the left of this chalk line is bad. They're Russian in this case. We don't deal with Russians. And then anybody on the other side, they're good people and they do things that we like. They donate to the right charities. They look a certain way. They are a certain gender. And so we tend to pick these people and we allow their attributes that aren't necessarily relative to the problems. We allow those attributes to override how we see things. And so you can imagine we often pick the wrong person and we often vilify the wrong people. So in that world, I say all this because in that world, there are people who are very influential business people. And if you think about Ukraine is basically the size of Texas. So if you think you took like the top 20 Texas business owners and you decided that 2/3 of them were oligarchs instead of businessmen, those people still have power. They still pick kings and they still go, hey, look, we want this person in charge because we want to get this outcome for our businesses. This is how we feed this country. Right. And so the top of the country is a lot closer to the billionaires that run businesses than say here. Now, we have some of that here, but it's just not that big of a place. And so when those guys are like, we want Zelensky to get elected, or we want Bob to get elected, or whoever it is, and if that goes contrary to how we do things here and what we want here, so if we want Bob and we don't want Zelensky as president, and the billionaires, but we want Zelensky, there's going to be competition there. And so some of that election is compromised because there is influence and a lot of it is us. And again, we picked the wrong people. And if you look at the past few leaders of Ukraine, you'll see a collection of people that are either probably in favor with the US and some that are not. So that is what I would say about that is the elections are less democratic there and they're more, I don't want to say autocratic, but there's a lot of influence from the very top.
Pete, can you talk to us a little bit about your relationship with your brother Eric growing up?
Oh, we were super tight. We used to play all the time. He's quite a bit younger than I am. So when he's 5.5 years younger than me, but we would still go out and roughhouse and just have a great time. Again, like he was a free range kid like I was. And so as soon as he was old enough to stay home with me during the day, we would just watch TV and play baseball in the backyard, run around, ride our bikes, all that kind of stuff. I remember one time I got him into a fight with a neighborhood kid. 'Cause even though he was smaller, he was really tough. And I'm like, I bet he can kick your ass. And I goaded Eric into doing that. He did not win that fight. And that poor kid that I set him up against, gosh, I owe that kid an apology too. But I was a kid myself. But we were kind of like, I always looked at Wally Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver. And I'm like, God, I got to be a better big brother. And so I tried to be more like Wally and just adore my kid brother and look out for him, but also let him be a knucklehead. Now, I think we did a pretty good job of that. But so he passed a couple of years ago. We always got along, but we were always different people. And so we struggled sometimes because I was more whimsical. He was more hard and straight. But ultimately, none of that mattered because when the chips were down, I knew I could count on him and I needed him more than he needed me. And then if he did need me, I didn't know how to help him when it was towards the end of his life. Yeah, we got along great. And I miss him every day.
I can totally relate to that and really sorry for your loss. I'm
Okay.
sure that he's watching over you all the time and very proud of who you are and what you've done with yourself. When did the military first come onto your radar? Do you feel like it was a calling or was it a practical move for you?
It was all practical for me. And actually, it's funny. My brother joined when he was like a senior in high school, right? And so he did what they call delayed entry. And then I had no clue I was going to join. So he had an 18-month ramp up and he was supposed to go to these getting ready to get in the military kind of meetings. And I graduated from college and I couldn't find a job anywhere. And I looked and I had all kinds of jobs, but I could not get like a career started because it was a bad time for that. And then the resources were different back then, but it's a little bit closer from graduation. Here are people that will help you kind of thing. Back then, you just kind of had to do it yourself. And I couldn't get a job. And so finally one day I was like, I got to do something different. And I'd had a conversation with a guy that I worked with. I worked at a Costco. And he's, I think, like me, he was stuck. And he had a better degree than I did. And he's, I think I might join the military and become a spy. And I'm like, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe I need to look into that and stop being so hard-headed. Because really, I was stuck. And I didn't want to wake up 20 years later. Nothing wrong with working at Costco. But I didn't want to wake up 20 years later having just worked at Costco, because that's certainly a path. And I went down one day and I looked into it and I told the recruiter to leave me alone. Don't bug me. We did. And a month later I said, let's go. And we did it. And it turned out that my brother and I were supposed to leave for the military on the exact same day, just through happenstance. He actually got delayed about a month, but either way, we are both in basic training at the exact same time. And so we wrote each other letters. It's one of my favorite stories about my brother is that time.
That's awesome. My heart goes out to you as well, Pete, for your brother. And we're going to get more into that as the show goes on. What you're doing with your Break It Down show and the people that you help on a daily basis, I'm sure he's very proud of your role in today's society
Thank you.
as an American on USAID, the waste, fraud, and abuse that's been shown and what needs to change.
Yeah. I have a lot of firsthand experience with this. When I was deployed, I would help out a commander, right? That's my job when I'm being a spy. And there's 4 facets to that. So I want to help the commander win more and lose less, and help the enemy lose more and win less, right? Anything in that wheelhouse is good for me. And when I saw USAID, I knew there were problems, that they were failing and not delivering and out of scope with what was going on, just completely, I don't want to say it's unfair, but in my mind, they were completely irrelevant and dangerous, and they were harming the mission because they weren't good at what they did. And they would give you 1,000 excuses. Doesn't matter. You're pulling us backwards. And so when I saw the State Department, when I saw USAID, I knew to go look at what they were doing and see if it was real. And I'm going to tell you right now, it never, ever, not once, not one single time did I find a positive impact from what, and I'm saying State Department because these guys work hand in hand on that. It did not work.
Oh,
So this is
wow.
not even like the fraud, waste, and abuse. This is the execution on the ground. We spent money to make whatever. And I'm giving you a direct story. So this is a real thing that really happened. I was working in a valley, had a really good governor. We built a great relationship with him, and we really had a chance to do some big things. And we were trying to get the farmers there to not grow poppy. And the governor's, I'm going to use Islam to do this. And so these guys, I'm gonna make sure they understand that this is against Islam to do this. And then what you guys are going to do is help me figure out how to get electricity in this valley, because there was not a drop, not one little bit of electricity in this valley, other than what we had in our generator. And that's only for the Americans. So I'm like, cool, let's do it. Let's figure it out. And I went to USAID and they're like, yeah, we have a small scale electrical dam project that we can put together for these guys. And it looks like from the geography, it's perfect for them. And they were right. And so we were going to do that. And so we got the paperwork started, and that's not my job. So that starts, but I am paying attention to it. And this takes a long time. As we go on, I check back in on it. I keep hanging in there. I keep hanging in there. So I'm telling the governor, everything looks good. There's nothing for us to do right now. And then I go in, and when it's been really a long time, and I'm like, hey, really, for real, what's the deal with this thing? And they're like, oh, that program was dead a year ago. And I'm like, then why did I chase this thing for the last 6 months? And they just shrugged their shoulders like it's no big deal. Meanwhile, in the real world, where there's really people's lives on the line, the farmers had gone crawfish on that deal because they didn't trust that there would be anything for them. They were right. And the governor now, who tried to build this connection with these people, had just lied to them about what they were going to get. And it convinced everybody in that valley, at least in some part, that there was no legitimate government from Afghanistan. It's hugely disabling. Shortly after that, a bunch of Americans were attacked and shot and killed, ambushed by their own partners, the Afghans. And we basically buttoned up and left that valley, never to return.
I'm speechless right now. So, Pete, what would you tell the people that are getting their information misleading, misrepresentation of USAID? Has anyone ever sat and thought, with all the billions, trillion of dollars that has been spent, why are kids still being fed rice in Africa? Why aren't there more wells? Why aren't there electricities in these hut areas? If there can be, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
make a point that nothing has changed. And I want to get your take on this audio clip from
Okay.
this African that speaks truth. And I want the listeners to hear it so they can get your take on it as well, Pete.
Understand the real reason why USAID is in Africa. And not just USAID, but other NGOs. You look at DFID, which is the British equivalent, and many other smaller ones. Their sole purpose was to act as if they're coming to rescue Africa. They are coming in claiming that they're introducing grassroots initiatives that are going to help the people. And so they use that as a way to go into the most remote parts of Africa. When you look at it on paper, it all looks really good. but they're actually wolf in sheep's clothing. They are using that open access sounding humanitarian to constantly destabilize governments. I can tell you right now, the majority of African leaders, and not just African leaders, but leaders in the developing world, are celebrating the exit of USAID. If you think about it, their sole purpose, for example, filling in the gaps in healthcare and education, where is the change? Show me one country that USAID was in and education improved. Show me what country where USAID was in and healthcare improved. The social services they're bringing, it's peanuts. The American taxpayer needs to know the billions of dollars that are being given to USAID, a fraction is making it to the people.
What do you think about that?
I hate to say that. I think that's 100% true. I hate it, but they're right. I want to deny that because I'm an American. It breaks my heart, but yeah, I think that's fair. Look, we are glad to interfere with someone else's elections, whether it's USAID, the State Department, whoever it is. And the thing is, and we say it out loud. Some of our politicians are like, oh, we'll get so-and-so to do such and such. And you're like, but they're their own nation. You don't just get to get the outcome you want. Who's going to be president? We don't want that to happen to us, but it happens all the time. That's not USAID necessarily, but indirectly, yes. So yes, when they go to Africa, I would say, again, this is Pete's rule, right? From my own experience, when I see USAID, they are destabilizing the region and destabilizing in the grander sense. They are not providing the stability. And you heard it from that person. It all briefs, it all looks great on the side. No, we're going to feed kids. You don't understand. We're going to feed kids. Okay. Have Pete go out and tell us what he sees. Because I'm going to tell you what Pete's going to find out. It's not going down how they say it's going down. Here's a reality. So we built a lot of schools, right? And this is really hard to do. And so every time I would get to a new unit or a new unit would get to me, they would say, hey, Pete, how many schools are in that valley? And I'm saying that valley, whatever that is, wherever that place is. And I would say, you're asking the wrong question. We should already know how many schools are there. And if we make a whole production out of going, it's all going to be performed. You need to know already who the teachers are and what curriculum they're teaching. And we've been here for too long to not know how many schools are there. And so we didn't handle this stuff professionally. And because we didn't handle it professionally, and because the people that fund these things weren't professional people, they weren't principled people, they didn't care for the money like they were supposed to, it got wasted. And so I would go, because I stayed in a lot of areas for a long time across multiple units, and I would go, hey, I've not been to this building. And I would ask the Iraqi guy, who built this building? And like, you guys did. What is it? Well, it used to be a school, but then some other guy took it over and now it's the this. And I'm like, it's an American building that's now belonging to somebody else. That's not a school. Yeah. And I'm saying school, any project at all. Either they would be wrecks, poorly built that were dangerous and condemned, or they would get swapped around all of the time. That would happen. It was normal. It was normal. So when you hear about USAID, yes, the money goes to weird places, but then they'll say it's going to give kids water, and it doesn't. And even when it does,
pull on the heartstrings of the American people.
Because who's going to say no to feeding kids?
Right.
So it's all briefs, and all of it does. And it's not just USAID. It's U.S. Department of Ag, it's Department of State, Department of whoever's involved over there. They are not, their feet are not held to the fire when they don't come through. And so they spend a lot of money and they don't ever go off the camps. They stay on the camps. And if they do, it's just like to talk to the governor. I can go out and I can say, what are you working on? And they don't like to tell me. And I'm like, what? I'm going to find out. It's in a briefing. I'm in the briefing room. So let me know so I can help you. And so I'll go out and I'll find out what they're working on. It's the thing I learned to do. And I would go before and after their operation, their building, their painting, their project, whatever it was going to be. And I would say, here's what I found. Nada. And so routinely, I expected the failure. That's why I went and chased these things, because I could show the commander, USAID is not helping you here, sir.
Talk about hiding things from people, Pete. What then led you specifically into counterintelligence, and what does that role really entail?
I got to counterintelligence because I took the tests, and I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm not like the world's greatest genius or nothing, but I'm pretty smart and I'm well read. And so the test for me, college kid, a high school kid test to test aptitude, it's just not hard. And so I tested well, and you can have any job. So my recruiter and I sat down, and he's, you know what, do intel or do, medical, unless you really want to go do something. I'm like, oh, that sounds good. What jobs are good there? And we just explored, and I just happened on counterintelligence. Like, you just, look, that job sounds interesting, right? But also, if I was to describe to you what I'm about to do, what counterintelligence does, you'd be like, I don't know what that means. So I didn't know either. My recruiter didn't know. And see, when we did all this, it was a joke. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm getting into. And he said, listen, the higher the number of the job, the better it is. That's the rule. My job was 97, and there really isn't any jobs above that. It's a 98 series. So it's all in the same mix. Medical, by the way, is 91, right? That's at the time, that's the code, like the series. And then I got into it. And so in my field, there's a lot of ways to do this job. And there's strategic work, like you're supporting an embassy or you're doing background investigations or you're chasing spies internally. And then there's electronic work where you're emplacing bugs. You're looking for bugs that have been emplaced, or you're examining what they call intelligence from a bunch of sources, and you're examining that. So you can do that. You can work on a task force that's trying to interdict drugs, on and on and on. There's over 100 subdisciplines in my field, and they're all very unique. My subdiscipline turned out was going to be combat spy. And so I would go out into the hard places, talk to the hard people. This is where the Hitler thing comes in. I know warlords. I've talked to them. And when you understand their day-to-day lives, you understand like what it takes for them to be there. And they, whether we like it or not, are often the government. And so we're trying to stand up this government that is poorly funded, poorly attended, poorly consumed. Meanwhile, the sheikh over here is, I can't keep people out of my house. There's always someone. I'm always working on this. My phone doesn't ever stop ringing. I got a guy who answers my phone, and he's got a guy who answers his phone because there's all these phone calls coming in. That guy is the government, right? And so I was really good at that. And that's what counterintelligence is trying to look. It's a lot of things, but the way I see it is I try to help a commander who's deployed, who can't possibly know enough about his area. I try to help that person win. That's it. I try to keep those guys safe. I try to prevent any catastrophes. But it's one of those jobs where you can do a great job every single day, and maybe nobody even knows, or maybe everybody hates you because you wear civilian clothes, or you get to drink booze or whatever it is. And they look at you negatively until you pay the bill. And I was good at paying the bill.
The whole point is protecting whoever is in your unit. You've been in Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Egypt, Germany. What did each place teach you?
Germany was one of those strategic missions. It was more long-term. They called it stractical, a combination of strategic and tactical. Tactical's like the stuff I did in war. And in between, there are these other jobs where there's always something for us to do. So we don't have to be deployed somewhere to do our work. And in Germany, I just learned the basics of being in the army because I'd never thought about it, never knew about it. And I just was like, one day I was in the army, one day, the day before I wasn't. And so I learned how to be in the army as good as I could. And I learned a little bit about the job there. I don't want to act like I knew a lot, but I was in training mode for myself. A lot of counterintelligence is self-taught and a little bit of mentoring. So for me, I was just learning how to be in the army. Then we deployed to Bosnia, and I got to be a CI agent every day. I got to leave camp every day, and I learned the battle rhythm of a field collector. And that happened to be perfect for me because that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be on a camp where we didn't go out. I wanted to be out. I needed to be out because I'm good at that kind of stuff. And I became proficient that first year. And so I was able to reliably go out and do this. Here's the difference in my career and a lot of other careers. I kept getting able to go off the camp reliably every day, often as possible. But I also promoted up in my importance. And so most guys leave the field because they just get too high rates. Because of the way my career worked out, I was able to stay in the field, but also graduate up into the higher level meetings because I understood how the army worked. And so a lot of my time in Iraq was making a lot of mistakes, getting into a lot of trouble, because when I bring bad news, people get mad, and I didn't know how to deliver it. I didn't know how to position it. I didn't know how to get access to it so I could reliably make it better. I learned that in Iraq, and it took me years to really figure everything out, but I finally developed a system. Then I began testing the system. How do I operate within this unit? Here comes a new unit. How do I operate within this unit? How do I help the commander so that they see me and understand that I'm here to help them, and they rely on me and they guide me? All of that was what I was doing. And then Afghanistan was like the master class. I knew it. I knew what to do. I could predict the future, not because I'm omniscient, but because I'd seen what we always do. I saw the patterns, and I could say, you're going to make these mistakes. Don't do them. You're not going to listen to me. So when you make those mistakes, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, hey, you made this mistake. And you're going to look at me and go, damn, you told me you were going to tell me that. And so that would happen over and over again. I learned to predict the future because I understood who we were. And I was able to help commanders be less us and be the better version of them. And they accepted that help. And that's remarkable in my field.
I like that, Pete. That actually rolls into the next question that I have for you. First, going over to these places, does it make you more patriotic to be an American for the freedom that we have and the way that we live?
I wouldn't say patriotic is the right word. I'm not like a raw, look, I love America. I'm so proud of the country we're from, and I do know how nice it is here. But I'm not like, and I'm proud to be an American. That's not me. I love it here. I'm proud of us, but I'm not like a raw kind of guy. I never have been a raw guy for really anything. Yes, seeing the world and understanding the freedoms that we have, I try to communicate that to people as often as I can. Like so here's how lucky we are. We can make our human waste movements into potable water that anybody can drink. We can water our yards with drinkable water. Just in the middle of the day when a lot of it just goes into the atmosphere. It doesn't even stay in the grass, it just evaporates. We can do that. That's how lucky we are. And when we do make waste, we can just push a button on our commode and it disappears. We never give it another thought. That is opulent. We have air conditioning. Everywhere we go, we have air conditioning. It's rare to go to someone's house and be like, why do you have an air conditioner? That's the response.
Right.
So all of these things, electricity, any day of the week, 365 days a year. Yes, sometimes there's blackouts, but come on. When it happens, we lose our minds. Now, if you didn't have control over how much electricity you had, if you didn't have electricity, how would we handle it? We are so wonderfully fortunate to live here. We can speak our minds. I can speak openly about these really challenging questions you're asking me. And I don't have to worry about reprisal. Oh, look, could there be some kind of intrigue? Sure. But most people, most of the time, can say whatever the hell they want. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. Take me to court. Even if I lie, I can lie to your face and say something, and it does not matter because I have a right to speak that because I'm alive and I'm an American.
And that's more of what I meant because I was going to ask you the massacre of Jews in Gaza in October.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to that when you first saw that broadcasted about what they did to this poor community?
I know who we are, and I've talked to us in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of us in there. But when I saw that happen, one, inevitable, didn't know it was going to happen, but I was shocked, but I wasn't surprised. And I'm going to say this. Israel has its moments where it's also been a bad actor over there. So let's understand that nobody here is innocent.
Oh, yeah.
But when we look at that atrocity, so here's the thing. So I read Bibi Netanyahu's book way before the war. His most recent book that came out, I think in 2022, because it's important. If this world leader is talking, all right, it's important. And one of the things that I know about him is he has been prime minister most of my adult life. And the left hates that. I don't care politically which side you're on. Those are facts. And so it's very hard for American left, by the way. We'll include the Israelis too, but I'm talking about the American left, which is preposterous, right? And so we on our left, we love the two-state solution. And a lot of the right does too. And he says in his book, he said, look, they've done nothing with that land. They can't improve it. They don't want a two-state solution. Guess what? Neither do we. And so we're going to have to figure something else out, especially because on the Palestinian side, this is just a fact. Most of the world does not recognize Palestine as a state. Are there some allowances in there? Sure. But the U.S. doesn't. Not only do they not recognize them, like that's not a country. That's just a place. That's interesting. In that book, when he's talking about all these different wars, they see dozens of wars that we don't even think about because it's not important to us. So there's all these sub-conflicts that they call wars, and we would too, if we were constantly being attacked by Mexico, like with missiles and everything, or suicide bombers, we would probably call that a war. And I know there's a lot of intrigue with that, and maybe that statement is not as strong as I need it to be, but the fact is Palestine, Hamas, they have been attacking Israel repeatedly, constantly, defying treaties, and again, sometimes legitimately pointing out the Israelis' bad behavior. But they've done this over and over again. And they are serious when they say river to the sea. They do not want any Israelis, and they'll say Zionists, let's be honest, they don't want any Israelis, Jews, in that territory. And the same kind of thing is said about, and if you want to talk about genocides and pogroms and all these things that eliminate people from an area, I can list a bunch of groups that have been attacked by Islamic groups. And we don't seem to care about that as a nation. We don't seem to say, hey, the Yazidis haven't harmed a soul in 1,000 years. Why are they being assassinated by Islamic monsters? Why do we allow these countries to import people? I'm all for immigrants. Why do we allow these countries to import people who are going to drive their sedan into a crowd and not be honest about what that is? I'm not against Islam. I know a lot of wonderful people who are Muslim. We're not talking about those folks, but we are talking about a pretty obvious set of people who hate the Western civilization.
Yes.
They hate anybody who's not Islamic. You could not, the two of you could not walk around freely in a lot of these countries. And in a lot of these countries, over a dozen, stoning is still a legal punishment. Stoning a human to death is legal in these places.
I don't know if you've heard in the past couple weeks, but a person that walks down the street with an American flag is now considered a far right extremist. When did our American flag become a left or right? It's America.
Yeah.
You're an American citizen. We have it so good here. Maybe not the best, but compared to a lot of countries and people like you're describing, yes, I thank my lucky stars. I am where I am. It needs to be better. There needs to be things improved, but it is nowhere near some of these countries. So then, along with that, on American soil,
Mm.
protesters claiming to support Palestine have been harassing Jews. Where's the line, Pete, between free speech and domestic terrorism?
I was in Vienna and there were some Palestinian focused demonstrations. I gave them a wide berth. I don't want to be the person that they latch onto. In my mind, if that was in America, you have the right to protest, but when it regularly leaks into violence and destruction, that's not legal. That's not free speech. That's crimes. And it's not easy to sort out where the line is there. But if someone walks by that protest and is, oh my gosh, if they're blocked from their classroom, if they are, these are things that are crimes. And
Yes.
so you get to speak your mind. You get to raise a little bit of a ruckus. But when you're asked to disperse, you have to disperse. And if you don't, then the sticks and the horses come out. And that's unfortunate. And sometimes you need some good, like, disobedience. That's worse than civil disobedience. Sometimes you need some of that. I'm not going to say that's not a thing. But when it's directed at a people, like it is in this case, when everybody's desperate to wave their anti-Semit, oh my God, I can't even believe I'm talking about this. But we should be so far past this now.
Yes.
The one thing, and I'll say this because I think it's important, because I don't hate anybody and I don't like violence, but sometimes violence is the answer. It is. All the moms out there, violence is not the answer. You know what? Maybe your kid should have punched that kid in the face.
Yes.
And straighten that problem out. Again, I'm not into violence, but sometimes
Some of
violence
those
is-
kids were held up in their dorm rooms and they couldn't even come out in fear of being hurt.
Yeah. And you don't get to terrorize, right? That's the word. You don't get to terrorize people and say that's free speech. You're being a terrorist. And I hate to be so absolute about these things because nothing is like that, but you don't get to go and terrorize people who live in New York. They're from New York. They're multi-generation New York Jews, and they're terrified to walk around their own city in case they get chosen that day. And someone does get chosen every day. And that is not what we're supposed to be about. We're supposed to protect people, not expose them to things. So yes, speak your mind. Yes, hold Israel accountable. I try to myself. But right now, and here's the fact, if Hamas wanted this war to stop, they could surrender unconditionally and the violence would be over. But they have fighting them. And so they choose to fight some more. And so they're going to get innocent people killed because they don't care about that. Because their goal is not saving their people. Their goal is the elimination of Jews in the West Bank. Whatever part of the bank you want to talk about, wherever Israel is, that they don't want them to be attacked by two different countries. Okay, fine. Then America is going to stand with them, and it should be resolute and say, we're not going to tolerate this. And this is true. And I'm expanding on your question a little bit, but this has always been true. One of the possible outcomes of this most recent war was there will never again be a Palestine. Just like Rhodesians. There is no Rhodesia anymore, but there are Rhodesians. They're getting less and less of them because they're getting old now, but it could be that there will never again be a Palestine because this is beyond the pale. And if they don't want to come to the table, which they refused over and over again, to establish a two-state solution, when President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and people are like, that's not the capital. It is. It's also the capital of, these guys have to deal with the fact that they share real estate. But to deny that, no, that's not how a free country works, especially if they've got a big brother like the US backing them up. And so a lot of this stuff is just, for me, but the other thing I have to say, and I appreciate you letting me go on about this, I look at all these problems, and when I have my people come on who are experts, and they teach me about their expertise, and sometimes we disagree, but we disagree as experts. I love to ask the question, when does the politics stop and the actual problems start?
Yes.
That is a nasty question. It's not unfair, but I don't expect them to be able to answer it.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
We're sure as shit going to end it. They could have ended it. They don't want to end it.
Yeah.
So 100% agree with you, Pete, on all of those points. Let's go back to the Gulf War era. What were your thoughts watching that unfold in the 90s?
I was 21. It was my birthday when that war started in 91. So it was my 21st birthday. I was not thinking about the Gulf War. I was thinking about boobs and butts and beers and all the B's, baseball, bacon, burgers, all of those things. That's what I was thinking about. I was aware of it. I had friends that were there, but it wasn't really in any way significantly on my radar. And I was like everybody back then, people forget this, we were disappointed that George Bush, the elder, pulled back and said, no, that's it. We're not going to topple Iraq. And it's, oh, come on, finish the job. I remember when we were all desperate for that. Those are my things. I really didn't have a whole lot to say about that. It seemed unjust that Kuwait got rolled over, and I was happy to see us stand up for them. I was happy to see President Bush go, this will not stand. You're not going to do this. And you have this many days to fix this, or we're going to come get you. I'm glad we went and got him. That's about the extent of my thoughts on that at the time, because I was wrapping up college and really having a very good time. And so that's really where my attention was focused. I wasn't into world politics back then.
Let's roll the clock forward. Post 9/11, I know that everybody coast to coast was affected by this. So you were in it. How did the Afghanistan war compare to earlier conflicts?
Afghanistan is a tricky place. It's really hard to answer that question in a way that is going to be clear and fair. It is really hard to understand what that place is. We approached that problem, in Pete's opinion, we approached that problem the wrong way. And I'm really hard on the generals and the admirals who were responsible for these modern wars, because all of them were over their career. None of them won. They might say, oh, I did my job, and blah, blah, blah. But look at the result. You lost. I'm here to tell you, you lost. And so I would just say it was an evolution in a bad way we didn't know what to do. In the 90s, we couldn't fight Russia. Matter of fact, Russia, this is great. Russia deployed with us being NATO and the United States, they deployed as our partner. Think about that. In the late 90s to Bosnia and in the greater Yugoslavian area, they wanted to be involved. We were going in that direction. There was talk of having join NATO, and NATO was built to stop Russia. And so we went from this, we don't know what we're going to do. Where's the bad guys at? So in my unit, we were a company of counterintelligence agents, which is remarkable to have a company of us all together. And then there was a company of interrogators. And there were some other intel assets in Germany. They're like, we're just not going to need these guys. And so we were going to eliminate from the army interrogators, because we were never going to fight that way again. Us agents, they were like, hey, get rid of your long rifles, get pistols. We were in the middle of this process of getting rid of all of our long guns. And we were just going to be secret agents who carried pistols, because that's what we were going to be. We weren't going to fight wars anymore. This is so close to the start of the Iraq and Afghanistan war that when I get to when I get to Iraq in 2004, I see a vehicle still painted with the names of people I know from that unit that I was in Germany in the mid 90s. Right. And so I'm like, oh my God, Specialist Vining, I knew her. Chief Warrant Officer Whitlock, I know that guy still to this day. So I'm looking at the Humvees that was in our unit, right? That's how soon this time frame, 95 to 2001 seems like a long time when you're living it, but it was so short that this vehicle hadn't even been repainted, right? From the unit that it belonged to in 1995. So it was a remarkable shift when the towers fell, and all of a sudden nobody knew enough Arabic. We didn't understand this. We knew this was a problem, but it wasn't a problem for like, the army. It was more like an FBI problem. And so we had to go from, we don't know what we're doing to doing something really fast. And we didn't pick the right things. We started off on the wrong foot. And then we added a thing called coin to our fight. And that complicated things because coin as a Pete, the academic scholar guy, has a problem with coin as a default mechanism, especially when we don't do the things that prepare people for the fight at hand. And so what happened was we picked a lot of the wrong paths and doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on those paths, trying to do something that really, I don't think, if it was possible, we didn't act like we wanted to get it done. We didn't train the right way. And so I guess that's what I would say about Afghanistan is that whatever it was, we showed up, much like your videotape you talked about there, we showed up with the problem and the solution in the same box without ever knowing what was happening in the.
Do you happen to have a picture of the truck, the vehicle that was still painted with the names of the people that you knew from back in the 90s?
Oh, the Humvee? I doubt it. I didn't take a lot of pictures back then. And I'm saying painted. We painted it because you would know whose vehicle it was. It wasn't
Right.
like in memoriam, that kind of thing. It was just like an identification thing. So it would have like the unit name, the squad name, and then driver, and then boss.
Okay, so I want to get a question in from one of our listeners, Pete. Andy has a question. Do you think the whole cycle of an armed conflict was being lessened after Vietnam? It seems that the usual B-ness didn't physically manifest as it did on previous similar events.
Yeah, I think so. I think the political will to send young men to their death in what looked to a lot of people like a pointless war, it was hard to stand up on patriotism when you don't understand what's going on and all these kids are getting drafted. So we went to that sign up and be a professional army and just didn't have a lot of fights to get into for whatever reason. We just didn't get entangled. Doesn't mean we didn't do things. Our special operations folks have always gone abroad, and that's 60 years of history now doing that. So there's a lot of things that were happening, but it wasn't big army maneuvers that we needed. And so for whatever reason, maybe the foreign policy was better, and maybe just it was a time of growth. Because you got to realize too, and this is a big factor. It doesn't seem like it today, but back then, if it's the 60s and 70s, this is just 30 years. This goes back to the late 90s for us, right? For example, 1995. That's the end of World War II, right? And so imagine if World War II was in 1995, there's people that are still getting their lives together. They're still recovering. There's buildings that are only 10 years old that have been replaced. There's all this continued rebuilding from World War II. And we hadn't even sorted out who owned all of Germany. All of that was still going on. And so there was just a lot of work, just like dusting off and getting the world back in the right direction. And so maybe there was just less focus on conflict because we were all too busy stacking blocks and digging wells and building businesses.
You brought up earlier about the situation with Russia being our ally to help. So Putin, strategic mastermind or overhyped threat?
If those are my choices, I'll say overhyped threat. Let me
Like
tell you
why?
why. I'll say DC. When I say DC, a lot more people than that. But DC is filled with people that have PhDs in how we're going to get Russia. And I'm being very unfair here, but that's just the reality. There's a lot of people that are desperate to continue to beat the Russians. Now, could we have ever been really good friends with them from the 90s on? Maybe not. I don't know. There's a lot of problems in how they approach things. And a lot of these Ukrainians, again, it's not that long ago that the wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. There's a lot of people that were raised either by Soviets or actual Soviets themselves that still exist. And so they do business in a certain way. Even if it's a newer way, they still look at the world and say, this is how we do things. And so their approach is still going to be different. The Russian economy is tiny compared to the American economy. They're really insignificant in terms, it'd be like us getting mad at, I don't know, Texas or something like that. Probably smaller than Texas. Maybe like us getting mad at Tennessee. And I'm not sure exactly how big the Russian economy is right now because of the war and all the sanctions, but it just isn't on the global scale. It just isn't that important. It's more important that, and it's just Pete saying this, so not attributing this to anybody else. It's more important that Russia is stable because it touches a lot of other countries. They have a lot of nuclear weapons. And if they get too wobbly and they get too broken apart, that's hyper dangerous for the world. Because now you have Chechens trying to go out and do things. You have Islamists who are negative towards anything going out and trying to get their hands and buy weapons on the open market. There's movies about this stuff. There's books about it. Like the Soviet Union collapses, Russia collapses, and what happens next? Oh my God. So Russia is, look, Putin gets to run his country. We don't get to like it, but he gets to do what he does. Just like right now, Donald Trump gets to do what he does because he is the boss. He got elected. Whether you like him or not, he gets to say, we're going to pick left. We're going to pick right. We're going to pick down. He gets to do all of that. And so does Putin. So we don't get to say, we don't like you. We're going to be mean to you and cause you trouble and then have him go, okay, I give up. That's not going to happen. That's the antithesis of what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to make Russia strong, and Russia likes a strong leader. And we have picked on Russia a lot. I'm not apologizing for Russia's bad behaviors, but we have been bad. We've been bad to Iran. And so when these countries stand up and defy us, it's partly because we've been bad to them for whatever reason. Who started it? Doesn't matter. We all act poorly towards these countries. And so there is no off ramp. They're like, we don't trust you. Do you know how many times we've gone crawfish on deals with people? You're like, never mind that. We're not going to do that. And then the country's, oh my God, Ukraine is one of those guys, right? We look at these things in a way that I think is unfair to Russia. And that's why I give you that answer, that there are a lot of people that want Russia's demise. That's how they make their money. And so their work is always an effort to don't forget about Russia. We used to laugh about, oh, here comes Russians to fold the gap, but in the mid 90s, because it was no longer a real threat. And all of a sudden now we're going to look at them and go, oh yeah, they've gotten even, they're still, look, they're a gigantic army over a gigantic space. They're hard to deal with, but they couldn't take over Ukraine, partly because we were there, but partly because Ukraine said no, and partly because Russians are terrible at logistics. Their system doesn't work well. And yeah, I think they're an overhyped threat. Are they dangerous? Do we want Putin to be putting nuclear material on people and hucking them out of windows? Of course not. But also, our table isn't clean either. We killed an American citizen with a bomb in a foreign country. Yes, he was a terrorist, we think, but we did that. Is that legal? How is that different than what Putin did? I don't know. Maybe it's a little different. Maybe not. We certainly make decisions that cause a lot of people to die because we're a very powerful country and we have no problem with it. The next time, this is true, the next time we send a drone to go blow up a wedding will not be the first and it ain't going to be the last.
And Pete, I commend you for speaking truth. I think many more people need to hear it put that way, because a lot of people seem to think that our country is Mr. Goody Two Shoes, and it is by far not. Recently, the JFK files came out.
Oh boy.
I went through them all. I would love to know your thoughts.
Have you been to Dealey Plaza?
No.
So I went there and I stood as close as you could stand to the actual nest. You can't go there anymore. Maybe you could get permission to do something like that. You know, you can be in the next window over or two windows over. You can be in the same basic area. And I looked and I was shocked at how close that target was. I know how to shoot and I've shot a lot of target practice with rifles and pistols. I'm a pretty good shot. And I thought, oh my God, how did he miss the first time? It was so close. And look, legitimately, if you were able to set up slightly better physical things, you could probably get someone to throw a baseball and hit the president in the head. It's that close. It's just not that far. And so when you think about that, and maybe a baseball is a little bit dramatic, but I could hit that core with the baseball with my arm. Back when my arm worked, my arm's all broken down from combat. I had a pretty good arm. And if you have someone that's got a great arm, oh my God, they'd absolutely hit someone in that car, right? Like a water balloon. You huck it. That's how close it is. We're talking about a throw. And I just had a guy on the show the other day, and we were talking, his name is John Brady. He's a PhD, and he focused on the psychology part. And he and I both had read a book by a guy named Paul Gregory, who was an economist for Stanford, who also grew up with Russian parents. So his family was part of the Russian Welcome to Dallas group. And so when these Russians would immigrate in, and you were in Dallas, you'd go to the Gregory family, and you would learn how to speak English. You would get the help. Here's how you go. Here's where you get a job, all that stuff. And Paul was part of that group. And they knew the Oswalds. And so Paul was tutoring Lee Harvey's wife and Marina. And they were exchanging letters. And there's nothing nefarious going on. This is just all innocent stuff. He's a college kid and she's a mom trying to learn English so she can adapt to her new country. And he realized one day that he was having an exchange, he thought with Marina, but actually it was Lee Harvey. And he was talking down to her, not talking down, but like in a scholarly way. You're using your English wrong. You have to do these things. And you know these things. And realized it was Lee Harvey. And so look, Lee Harvey was troubled. He was uncomfortable wherever he was. He just didn't fit in. He wasn't, he would say he wasn't bright, but he probably was dyslexic. And he had these dissociative things through his physical and social behaviors that allowed for bad things to creep in. He takes that shot at that general 7 months prior to the assassination. And so when I look at all of the things, was the CIA doing stuff? Sure. 'Cause that's what they do. They do stuff. They go out and they follow people and they try to create intrigue. And some of that absolutely could be on the inside. And that's why they had the church committee come in and go, hey, CIA, knock that off. So there is some CIA action there. But I'm saying pound for pound, push for push, Lee Harvey Oswald shot at somebody that day, and the president was that person. Did somebody else help? I don't know. It's so hard to know. I don't think we'll ever, if there was a smoking gun, that thing got buried a long time ago. But there's so many questions, so many possibilities. It is a very odd thing. And then I think about President Trump, who actually got shot at in the past year. We know nothing about it. The kid is dead and everything, but there's nothing released yet. And maybe it's too soon, but it disturbs me that it can get black holed so fast. So I don't know. So I guess my answer to you is until someone proves to me otherwise, I think it's Lee Harvey Oswald that shot him. Did somebody else do something? Sure. Was it bums by a fence? I don't know. Was it a guy in a sewer? Probably not. But I think Lee Harvey Oswald shot at JFK.
And I don't think that we will ever have clear-cut answers to those questions, but we so enjoy hearing other people's opinions. While we're on this, which was obviously a horrible thing that happened in American history, what is the worst thing that you saw or experienced during your time deployed? And also, what are the biggest misconceptions that regular civilians have about war?
I don't know if it's the worst thing. And in my job, you collect a lot. I call it my book of woe because there's just so much horrible things that you encounter. And so we came upon this family that had a farm. And in the back of the farm, they had what was left of a building. And that building had 2 walls, and that was it. And I'm saying 2 walls. I'm saying what was left of 2 walls. They had a corner. And that's where this wife, her husband was dead, and her kids lived because she couldn't live. So her husband died. And so his brother, so let's say my brother Eric's dead, right? And his wife come to live with me because that's the obligation. And then and Helica, that's my brother's wife, I put her back in a field with no power, no toilet, no anything, no money. And they live in what's left of a corner of a house. And I'm like, can't we help this lady? Here we are, the United States of America. And we can see this person and here's the thing is, and again, I'm going to be unfair to Islamic people. In that culture, at its worst, they'll look at that person and say, that's a whore. And maybe they're right. Maybe she had to sell her flesh to take care of her kids. And what mom wouldn't in that case? So we look at that. We looked at that lady, and I was told up and down, I'm like, but this is just a simple thing. Like, just have her immigrate, like anything. We do all kinds of stuff that costs way more money than just getting these people on a plane and saying, hey, do you want to go to America? We just want to get you out of this trouble. And we couldn't be bothered. And I was ashamed that we couldn't, all the help we're giving all these people that already had businesses. And I will be fair, we gave that lady a cow so she could milk it and sell milk. And that's it. That was our plan. And look, whoever did that, great. I'm so glad that they did that. But that's all she had. And in that country, if someone decided to come take her cow, what's she going to do about it? So I think about that. And look, if there's one of those, there's a million of those kind of stories. And I came across so many of them. And it's the tragedy of war for the people is terrible. Like when President Trump, I'm no fan of President Trump, but when I want the people to stop dying. So does Pete.
100%.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
I agreed.
You
Yeah.
think about it. We're so focused on, is Putin a bad guy and how much land is he going to get? You forget that we've killed in general. The world has killed all of these Ukrainian and Russian men, put a real dent in the male population there. How much harm is going to come to those women who live there for the next 30 years?
Exactly. There's some that are just wiped out. Their generation is done because if there
Yeah.
was a man and a woman that have been married and they haven't had children yet,
Yeah.
and he's the last man in the family, we got about 30 minutes. I want to get your take on these other headlines, Pete.
Okay.
What's your view on the growing power of the military industrial complex?
It's always too big. I don't want us to be incapable in the battlefield. And this is one of the misconceptions to finish the rest of that thing. War is not all that dangerous. It's dangerous when you're in the moment when it's dangerous. But I would say 90% of the time, which is way higher than, a way lower percentage than it is here in America. There's nothing happening. I've been shot at, I've been blown up, all those things. But most of the time you walk around and there's not that much to do. When you spend a lot of money on the military, no president, maybe President Trump, we'll see. No president says, oh, just keep those guys in Kansas. We're not going to use them to influence things. Big military spends a lot of money, and that is good for our companies that do that kind of stuff. It becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy. And that means you have this well-armed military. And you'll hear all kinds of things. Oh, we're going to run out of missiles. We're not going to run out of missiles. Oh, we're going to run out of bullets. We're not going to run out of bullets. We act like that's a thing, but it's really not. And so we have all of this surplus, when we have all of this capacity and it's focused on war. And to be fair, our war economy is very small compared to our giant, huge economy, but we overuse that thing. So Yemen, there's a war going on in Yemen right now, and we're definitely involved in it. We're trying to get it settled through some brutal actions, and they're for sure attacking Israel. And all that's bad. Before October 7th, one of the things I would ask my friends who are very hawkish, I would say, why are we messing with Yemen? No one even cares about Yemen. And they would have some kind of excuse or whatever, right? Look, should people in Yemen, should they be attacking the seaways out there? No. And there should be a penalty for that. But the biggest problem with Yemen and the US is that they're closing off a shipping lane, and that makes our tacos more expensive, our shoes more expensive. And we don't like that. And as soon as that happens, as a nation, we're like, kill those people. Maybe they need killing, maybe. And I'm ready to pop someone in the nose. But I don't know that the cost of food being more expensive than it was before is a reason to go launch remote bombs at people and tell me that you're doing a good thing. Because I'm going to contradict myself because I'm a hypocrite. Sometimes we need to go do that stuff. And maybe this is one of those times, but we haven't earned the license to say we're going to go do this because we've gotten it too wrong in the last 25 years too much. That's why I'm hard on us, because we've gotten things wrong. We've acted in ill-principled manner. We've let that lady live in a corner of a house when we have trillions of dollars at our steps where we could just let that person go. We forced all these Afghans and all these Iraqi interpreters to stay when they had an American dream. But we let people pour across with no documents, nothing at all. We let them pour across. But people who actually put themselves in lives, sometimes killed, sometimes shot, had their lives ruined in Iraq and Afghanistan. We let those people rot out.
Yeah.
It costs nothing. That airplane's going to fly all the time. So you put four people on it and you figure, not even that. It's going to fly no matter what. You're putting an extra 800 pounds on an airplane, not even 800.
My husband's a veteran, Pete. I know you are too. And thank you so much for your service and what you're doing today. So are we doing enough for our veterans?
Yes and no. How about that? Yes and no. The VA is great. It really is, except for when it's not great. But it's so much better than it was. And again, I'm not a Trump guy, but it got better under his watch. And part of it was he allowed us to leave the VA when the VA wasn't able to give us a solution. And so we're still part of the VA, but we can go on to the private economy and you'll get the care that we need. I had my ankle rebuilt. It took 2 years to get it done. Not that big of a deal, but if it was something serious, oh, wow, pretty big deal. But I had it done at UC Irvine and they did a great job. And then when my surgery site got infected, I had to go back in the hospital for a week and it cost a lot of money. I didn't pay a dime. How can I complain about that? I can't. I hurt my ankle in combat legitimately, right? Technically Kuwait, but I was going to combat and that's covered, right? And so the American people don't mind that. And in that regard, we do a great job. But there's so much fighting. The thing that triggers my PTSD the most is dealing with the people in the VA when they won't provide care. And this is when it gets bad. When they say to me, because one of the things that helps me in my back, my body, is I get massage. And that sounds exotic. And I get it. It's not. It's medical massage. It's uncomfortable. It's therapeutic for me and allows me to run my life. But I need it about once a week. And if it's once a week, I don't need to be on pain meds reliably. I don't have to always take them. If I get those 50 massages a year, which is fairly inexpensive when you look at everything else, I can be more productive. My mental health is better. I can work out more. when I don't get it, when I get denied that coverage because like, oh, you only authorized 12, even though I know that's not true because I have to go fight them. I have to go battle them and get from them what I'm supposed to get. And when someone there says, if you get more, what if someone else gets more? And I'm like, yeah, I don't care about that. Give them more. Look, are people going to defraud the system? Sure, but I'm not. We all agree that my back is screwed up. And you want to give me an epidural? No, thanks. How about just a massage? Are you telling me if you give me 5 epidurals, is that going to make my condition better? No, no, it's not going to make my condition. This gives me relief. And so in that regard, we do fail our veterans. We also, and I'll just say this honestly, our companies don't hire veterans in a way that makes sense to me. So when I get out of the Army, I'm a high functioning, highly credentialed person. I can't even get an interview. And I live in Orange County, California, right? And so I'm going to one of these organizations, like we help veterans get jobs, and they do. They help people who don't have credentials get jobs for people. So that's pretty simple because you're just saying, hey, we're going to put these people in line to become a whatever. Nothing wrong with those jobs, but that wasn't me. And so I came in and I said, yeah, I need help. I don't need a whole lot of help. Just open some doors. Let me go in and talk to these people. And I'll figure out the rest. And they're like, how many applications are you willing to fill out a week? I'm like, applications? What kind of jobs are you talking about? How much do you think you need to earn? Like, it's Orange County. I have a master's degree. I've got 2 decades of work experience. I would say $100,000 is a pretty good estimate. Maybe I come in at 80, right? And they look at you like I was crazy, but I know the starting wages out here for jobs at my level. I also know that if I go to a company, if I go to Home Depot and apply, sure, they'll give me a job working on the floor, but they also don't expect me to stay because I'm overqualified for that job. And so I went around, I couldn't find a job with anybody. I couldn't even get an interview. I was told things like, you should go back to Afghanistan and go work there. I was told this when I got an interview, and that was always a favor to a friend. I was told by another person, I can't afford you. And I'm like, we haven't even talked about a price. So when we look at that, and I didn't want to go to war anymore. I didn't want to work for the defense industry. I wanted just to come back and I wanted to do a job I was qualified to do, but I couldn't even talk to anybody. No, I turned myself into a handyman. I'm not all that handy, but I'm good at people. So I was in this startup in San Francisco building chairs for them, and they're having a meeting while I'm there because, hey, we all got to work in the same space. And it was all stuff I knew. It's all about culture. And I'm an expert in culture. And so when the meeting was over, I grabbed the guy and I'm like, I know I'm building your chairs, but I'm really good at culture and I understand what's going on. And you guys, there's a lot I can teach you guys. How about I come back and we have a meeting? And he's like, I think so. Like, are you kidding me? A guy who's like, I'm not world renowned or anything, but I can talk to the world renowned people and we all agree that we all know what we're talking about. And they don't ever say, oh, Pete, get educated. They know that I know things. And I couldn't get a job helping these folks make fewer mistakes, which is what I'm good at doing. So when I think about the VA, I think about that. I think about people who have credentials who can't find proper employment unless they stay in the military industrial complex. And if you don't want to live in that world, I didn't want to live in a world of threat anymore because I'd done that and I was full of it. So that's what I would say is there's a lot of good things. We've made a lot of progress. And in some ways, it's like embarrassing that we have so much because there are a lot of people that need more, but we also do the job. And when the VA people tell me that they can't afford to give me the treatment I need, I'm like, no, that's not the deal. The deal was, Pete, grab your ruck and go. I did that. You guys were going to help me afterwards. So the money thing, that's on y'all. Go to Congress, go get more money. By the way, there's not enough vets signed up for this healthcare anyhow. So you guys actually are way under. If you're complaining about me, wait till everybody shows up. And you have to care for all of us because when you go to combat, you get hurt. And it's just the bottom line.
You just spoke a little bit about PTSD that is often talked about, but is rarely understood. What were your first warning signs? What helped you to manage and heal? And what resources would you recommend for struggling vets out there?
I wasn't really aware that I had any kind of PTSD until I came back home. And I became unmoored with my relationship because that didn't last. Eventually I ran out of money because I couldn't work. And professionally, I was going nowhere. So I was completely unmoored from all the adult things you're supposed to have. And I didn't respond to it well. I started making worse and worse decisions. I was getting into more and more trouble. Nothing big. I wasn't robbing banks or anything, but I was going in a direction that provided me a lot of trapdoors underneath me. And I didn't need trapdoors. And I started to realize that I'm not acting like a person in the real world. I'm acting like this crazy person. And so I had to work on that. And I was forced to work on that because I got in a little bit of legal trouble. Nothing big. There was an incident at a bar and they decided that I needed to go to jail. And I'm like, I didn't even do anything. And what it was, my friend got kicked. This is how stupid this was. My friend got kicked out for being too drunk. I was in the bathroom. I came out of the bathroom and they're like, your friend got kicked out. All you guys have to leave. And I said, oh, I just want to go grab my phone. It's over there by where I was sitting. And they're like, you cannot. Because I stashed it away so no one would steal it. And I'm like, really? I just want to go. I'm glad to leave. I'll leave my credit card behind. I don't need to close it out. I just need to grab my phone. And they wouldn't let me grab my phone. I'm like, so I went outside and I talked to the security guard and and I'm pretty hard on security guards. And so that guy decided he needed to call the cops. And those cops came and electrocuted my friends and I because I wanted to get my phone. And so they took us and put us in jail. And the next morning I got out of jail and I got a cab over to where my car was. I didn't drive, of course, wasn't going to drive. I walked in, the bar wasn't even open yet, but the front door was open because they were arriving. I walked in and before anybody even realized it, I grabbed my phone and I was gone. And that was and the thing when the cops came, they never said, what color is your phone? Let me just go get your phone. Like they easily could have de-escalated it. I didn't want to leave my phone, not willingly, because it was my property. And then I'm the one responsible for it. No one else. I'm like, do you want to take responsibility for it? No? Okay, great. And that incident caused me to have to go through the legal system that forced me to get involved with the VA. And I got help from the VA. It's where the VA is great. And so I started dealing with my PTSD. I have not licked it, but today I'm still in charge of how I feel. And I've taken it very seriously. And so my advice to any veteran is one, get connected to the VA. And when they tell you no to something, you ask them again and you fight them and you fight them and you fight them because that is what you have to do. And it's crazy, but when you have a certain kind of president and you go in, they're like, we're going to say no to you on that. And it's like a default answer. No, make them tell you no. So even if you're on the fence, I'm like, is that like a disability from the army? Did you get your ears blown up because you're at a rock concert or because that bomb went off? Both. Okay, we're going to deny your claim. So that's the kind of thing you have to go fight. If you go get involved with the VA and you do your job and you treat your well-being like it's your job and you do that first, it's foundational, it's elemental. We'll go to the gym, we'll work out, we'll do all these things, we'll shoot our guns and be great veterans and all that kind of thing. But we won't sit down and expose ourselves to therapy, whether it's group. And look, if group therapy doesn't work, go try behavioral therapy. If that doesn't work, you try psilocybin. If that doesn't work, you go back to group therapy. And then you keep iterating through all of the kinds of help because maybe it's a different therapist. Maybe it's a different protocol in terms of like medicine and therapy. Maybe it's going to the gym. Maybe it's equine therapy, but you have to continually go after it. Like it's the most important thing in your life is depending on it because guess what? Your life is depending on it.
Couldn't agree with you more. Your brother Eric's suicide. Can you share how that impacted your path and your perspective?
So I have my own suicidal ideation problem every day. I have this storm where no matter how good a mood I am, at some point it's coming. And even if I put it off for the day, it's just going to be worse the next day. So I just have to deal with it. And that's one of the things I've learned. And so I let the air out of my balloon. One of the things my therapist described for me was a nap every day. And it's true. Like I'm hard on myself. And so I go take a nap that kind of calms me down. And I don't tend to build up this big, do I have to take a nap every single day? No, but every day I take a nap. My brother wasn't able to do that. It was during COVID. There's the COVID craziness that was going on. And he struggles with addiction more than I ever did. And I've tried to be an alcoholic. I'm just not one. It's just not going to happen. But my brother, he had that problem. And so he was self-medicating with alcohol. He was struggling with whatever it was. And he made a significant attempt on his life. I was gone on a camping trip and I got the phone call from my mom and she said, oh my gosh, and what's his condition? He's 100% fine. Other than being suicidal, he's okay. And he got 50 a couple of times. So as he's going down that path, I'm talking to my therapist. She said, the first thing is understand your brother's very sick and he's been sick for a long time and you may not be able to save him. You can save anybody. So let's make sure we protect you. And so my therapist and I worked on me, making sure that I was going to be able to get through this thing that it turned out to be inevitable. We didn't know that. And she's like, and if you're going to help him, this is what that looks like. And we worked on all of that, but partly because of COVID. Like one of the times I went to go see him after one of his big attempts, I just want to see you. And I'm like, okay, I came up. They were in Tahoe and they rented a house, but I'm coming up from Orange County. I'm trying not to be anybody's COVID problem. He's got old people in the house. They all live together and I'm joining their cluster and I've been around, because I moved around quite a bit during COVID, but I always did it in a way that I thought was safe and followed the rules. And I'm like, Eric, I don't know if you guys are sick. I don't know if I'm sick. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't stay here. I can't stay with you guys because it's dangerous. And I don't want to risk his wife's parents. His abuelita and abuelita were there. And I didn't know what to do about that. And so I couldn't help him in that moment. And look, does that mean that I killed my brother? Absolutely not. But the realization is that some people are going to kill themselves. And in my brother's case, I treated it like he had stage 4 cancer when we found out. And he had battled. My brother was tough, tougher than me, because I used to beat him. And I was way bigger than him. And I wasn't mean about it, but I put a whipping on him all the time. And he was just a very tough, resolute person. And when that started to crack for him, he wasn't able to grab his own lifeline. And the thing that I say to everybody when they talk about veteran suicide and that kind of thing, and we always like, make sure you reach out. No, you reach out. That person's got 2 hands on a lifeline. They need you. So call those people way before they get into trouble. All the time. Call people, interact with them, take them out to eat, go check in on them, hold them accountable when you need to, love them, listen, whatever those things are, but be engaged. And if not, then look, it's okay to say, I was too busy to care. I wish it was different, but that's all right. We can't all take on every crisis. But if you know someone who's struggling, get involved in their life. And if that's uncomfortable for you, guess what? It's uncomfortable for them. I would talk to my brother. He'd be struggling, maybe a little tipsy, maybe not. And I would say, really, Eric, how you doing? And he would say to me, terrible.
Yeah.
And I'd hang up the phone when we were done talking, and then he's right back in the same spot. And I'm like, how much of this is for me as opposed to how much of this is for him? I didn't mind calling him. I didn't mind talking to him. Sometimes he wanted to scream at me because he was mad. So he was screaming at me and I would take it the wrong way. And I'm like, oh my God, he's just mad. He's scared. And there were no words that I could give him to make him unscared. He was deeply sick and terrified he was going to lose his family. And he didn't act in a good way, but who can act in a good way when they're losing their grasp on life?
Again, my heart goes out to you, Pete. You're strong. I'm envious of your strength. And I'm sure that's part of the reason that you launched the Break It Down show. I want my listeners to gravitate and get your show on their playlist. So, what is your show about? What do you cover? And tell everyone where you can be found, your handles as well.
Sure. Pete A. Turner on everything. If you want to email me, pete@breakitdownshow.com. I'm glad to talk to whomever, glad to help you. One of the things I do professionally is to help people build their podcast. I'm glad to talk to you about it. The main thing I do with people is I try to talk them out of it because, as you ladies know, it's a lot of work. It is hard to stay consistent. And unless you want a job that's really, really low paying, like maybe do something else. But if it's a hobby, God bless, go do it. The Break It Down show is a wonderful thing. I can't believe where we are now. And by we, really me, because it's mostly me that does it. The show I started with my buddy John and I. We had a radio show and they kicked us off, this community radio. They kicked us off the air and said, you guys are too good, too big. You're not allowed to come here anymore. You're part of the family, but you can't use this microphone. Go do something bigger. We don't know what to tell you what to do, but you're wasting your time. And so we believed him and we did. And they were right. And we met amazing people. Oh, just amazing people every day. My show is about life. And so we talked about JFK and Mangione, all of these Sirhan Sirhania the day with that guy, John Brady, I was telling you about. But I also talked to him. I love doing this. When I'm able to, I get my gear and I go to someone's house and I talk to them. And my friend Shannon Michelle, she became my friend because of the show. She got into a bad motorcycle accident on PCH and basically died. And they brought her back. But her brain was so scrambled that she has trouble with short-term memory, but she can function. She can live a regular life. And I get to meet this amazing person who's taken all of that wisdom. And a lot of her wisdom was she would wake up and then not remember, wake up and not remember. So as she was waking up over and over again, she started dictating notes to herself so she could hopefully hold on to some of it. And she amassed all this wisdom, all this insight by going through this process. What an amazing thing to be able to do, to sit on her couch and talk to her like I'm Oprah and just have this amazing conversation. And that's just the two most recent shows. It's over and over again. Ladies, with every topic you can imagine. When Black Lives Matter and all that stuff was going on, I had people from all kinds of different points of view who are legitimate people who talk about these things on the show. We're trying to sort things out in real time. But sometimes we're just talking about music and whatever it is, because that turns out that's life. And so I'm over the moon with the show and how successful it is. Primarily, YouTube is the place where most people go. And that's where I put most of the stuff up. I sometimes publish podcast channels, but I'm over that. It's a lot of extra work for not a lot of any value. And so I want people really to go to YouTube when they watch. But look, if you want to listen to my show, I think you'll enjoy it. If I'm your cup of wax, then there you go. I don't hype my show too much because the folks that want to find it, and I'm really happy with all of the people I get to talk to. I don't get to talk to everybody I want to, but I get to talk to a lot of amazing people. I might get to talk to Richard Dreyfuss, and we'll see what happens. But that's kind of the game I'm playing is I get to reach out to Richard Dreyfuss, and I get so many amazing people. Not that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't break my heart to not get him because look, he's either going to talk to me or he's not. I put my pitch in. I don't have to worry about it because my show often books itself. It's amazing. It's amazing. My show's bigger than me in a lot of ways. I'll pitch it to somebody. They're like, oh my God, 2,000 episodes. Yeah, of course I'll come on. And so I'll get people because of the bona fides of my show, as opposed to whoever the hell is Pete. And so and because of where I live, I get to talk to a lot of very famous people. It's just, and you two know, it's amazing. Look at this conversation we get to have now and all the insight that we get to share. And granted, right now it's me talking, right? But a lot of times I'm saying the words of somebody else I've talked to because I get to interview anybody I want on any topic. And it's just enriched my life so deeply.
This is actually my second show that I started. My first one was Studio Senator. I'm right with you. It is a big commitment. You're right. I'm on Podmatch. The guests book themselves. We're booked out until July, right? We're tired of hearing celebrity sob stories and how bad their $10 million mansion needs. I want to talk to the military, to a teacher, a garbage man, and also professionals, human trafficking advocates, and what have you. This is where we wanted to take this show, and having you on has been a tremendous honor. And I highly suggest everyone add the Break It Down show to your playlist. So this was Pete Turner, combat tested, soul searching, and unapologetically honest. If this episode hit you hard, that's the point. Pete's journey from war zones to podcasting and his work with Save the Brave is proof that telling the truth takes guts.
And Pete, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for your service to our country. Be sure to check out the Break It Down show and support Pete's cross-country ride for the brave. Our next episode will be Monday, March 31st, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. Check out our catalog of episodes on all streaming platforms. And please follow our chemtrail on social media at Social Disruption Pod on Instagram and Threads, and at Raw Disruptor on TikTok, X, and Truth Social.
And until next time, stay bold,
Stay unapologetic.
stay disruptive.
Instant.